Welcome back, class, to part 3 of your Federal Reserve worksheet. Now, this lesson, we're going to be covering the discount rate and how the Fed can use that to control the money supply and therefore how much inflation or deflation we have. We're also going to end the video showing your first glimpse at the Fed chairman game, which is a game that you are going to have to play and beat as an assignment coming very soon. So let's get into how this works. The discount rate is the interest rate in which the Federal Reserve charges other banks to get loans. So as we get into that, it's going to be the third tool of how the Federal Reserve controls money and a tool that they use and change very frequently. So let's go ahead and take a look at their tools. Remember, we have the reserve requirement. That was the first tool we covered. This means, remember, if you increase the reserve requirement, banks have to hold on to more money, and therefore they're going to give out less loans. There's less money in the money supply, therefore less inflation. However, if the Federal Reserve decreases the reserve requirement, that means that banks have to hold on to less money, so they have more to loan out. Therefore, they give out more loans, meaning there's more money in the economy, causing more inflation. So that's how they can use the reserve requirement. But remember, the Federal Reserve almost never uses the reserve requirement. Now, we also have open market operations, which dealt with the buying and selling of bonds. Remember, if the Fed buys bonds, that means the bonds go to the Fed and the money goes into the economy. Therefore, there's more money in the economy, or banks have more money to give out more loans, and this means you can have more inflation. However, the Fed sells bonds. That means that the bonds are going into the economy and the money goes into the Fed. And remember, if the money's in the Fed, the money is dead. So that money is out of the economy, and therefore banks have less money to give less loans. Therefore, there would be less money in the money supply, causing less inflation. Now, the third one we're covering is the discount rate. And what the discount rate is also known as the discount window. You can think of it as the window that banks will go to get a loan, like the cashier. And it leads to something else called the federal funds rate. Now, the federal funds rate and the discount rate are technically different things. The federal funds rate is the rate that banks lend to each other. It's their interest rate. But you don't really need to know that for this class. So if you hear discount rate and federal funds rate, you can essentially, for all intents and purposes in this class, think of them as the same thing. I mean, know that they're different things, but they'll always work the same for us. So don't get really scared. You're going to see the federal funds rate get mentioned. Just know that it's the same as the discount rate. All right, so the discount rate, or the federal funds rate, deals with the Fed's role as the lender of last resort. Remember, banks get loans and need loans all the time. Now, typically, a bank wants to go to another bank because that bank will give it a better rate than the Federal Reserve. So why would a bank ever go to the Federal Reserve? Well, that's only as a last resort. If a bank's in deep trouble, like Wells Fargo is about to become bankrupt and they go, I need money. And they go, hey, Chase, can I get a loan? Chase says, no. And they go, hey, Bank of America, give me a loan. Bank of America is like, times are tough. I can't give you a loan. Wells Fargo can always go to the Federal Reserve and say, I need a loan, and the Federal Reserve would give it to them. So that means the Federal Reserve is the lender of last resort. But this means that the Fed sets the interest rates that banks will have to pay to get a loan from the Fed. So the Fed sets the interest rates that banks would have to use to get a loan. This means that if they get a loan from the Fed, they have to pay interest on it. So the Fed makes the interest rate higher, banks would have to pay more money for the loan. If they set it lower, banks would get cheaper money. So to think of it this way, if the interest rate's high, banks will try to give each other loans below that rate. It would be a better deal. But if the Fed were to lower that rate, banks can't offer interest rates above it because, well, the other banks would just go to the Fed to get the loan. So if the Fed lowers the interest rates, all the other banks, they're going to have to lower their interest rates to give each other loans as well. So to think about it this way, we said the discount rate is the Fed's role as the lender of last resort. This means the Fed sets the interest rates that banks will have to pay to get a loan from the Fed. All right, this means if the Fed raises the discount rate and a bank needs to get a loan from the Fed, the bank will have to pay more for the loan. Even if the bank doesn't want to go to the Fed, if they're going to other banks, they're still going to have to pay more for the loan because, well, those banks now have higher interest rates, and it essentially they can make more money holding their reserves to the interest rate the Fed gives them to hold their reserves there. I know it's kind of complicated on that one, but just know if the Fed raises their rate, the banks raise their rates. If the Fed lowers their rates, the banks lower their rates. So this means the Fed raises the discount rate and a bank needs to get a loan from the Fed, they will have to pay more for the loan. Well, banks have to pay more for the loan, then their money, the money they're getting is more expensive. So if a bank has to pay a higher rate, they will charge borrowers or consumers a higher rate to get a loan. So now that banks get money and it's more expensive for them to get money, they're going to charge consumers or borrowers more money to get a loan too. So that means you're going to pay higher interest rates. So we said if banks have to pay a higher rate, they'll charge borrowers a higher rate to get a loan. Because consumers have to pay a higher interest or a higher rate to get a loan, consumers will acquire, well, let me ask you this. If your loan's more expensive, will you get more loans or less loans? Clearly, the answer is you would acquire fewer loans. So because the interest rate's higher, money's more expensive, people get less loans. All right. So now if people are getting, people got less loans, therefore they will then have less money to spend. And if people have less money to spend, this would cause, you guessed it, less inflation. So I know this is kind of like a whirlwind of stuff, but just think of it. If the Fed raises the interest rate, banks raise their interest rate. And if banks have a higher interest rate, consumers see these expensive interest rates and they don't get as many loans. So if they get fewer loans, they have less money to spend. So there's less money in the money supply, causing less inflation. All right. So if you understood that, I bet you can pause the video right now and do this part down here all by yourself because, well, it's essentially the whole thing in reverse. So go ahead and try to give that a whirl right now. Now, if you're unable to, let's see if you got it right. So, however, if the Fed lowers the discount rate, so the Fed's now going to lower their interest rate they're charging banks. This would make loans cheaper. So if a bank got a loan from the Fed or other banks, they're going to pay less for it. So the banks are like, ooh, cheap money. They get more cheap money. So banks are going to get more loans. Thus, they're going to have more money to lend out to consumers at a, you guessed it, lower interest rate. So banks get money and they get money cheaper, they're going to lend it out to you at a lower or cheaper interest rate. Okay. This means that there would be more money in the money supply, causing more inflation. So if banks get money cheap, consumers get money cheap, therefore they get more money, spend more money in the money supply, higher inflation, higher prices. If the Fed raises their interest rate, on the other hand, money's more expensive, and therefore there'll be less money in the money supply, causing less inflation. Okay, so hopefully you got that. And now's a good time to review it if you're still kind of confused, because right here, we're going to go down here to what we call the Fed chairman game. And what the Fed chairman game is it is essentially this game. You are the new Fed chair. You've been appointed to control the economy. Now it's giving you three things to consider. One is this blue line, the unemployment rate. What the Federal Reserve has is a dual mandate. They have two jobs. One job is to keep unemployment at the natural rate. Remember what we covered, structural and frictional employment? That creates a natural rate of unemployment. So they want to keep it there. And in this game, it's at 5%. So your first goal, keep unemployment at 5%. The second mandate is to keep inflation at the target rate. The thing is, we want some inflation. There's a problem with no inflation or deflation and create something called liquidity trap that we might be able to get to in some of our Zoom meetings. But the target rate of inflation is 2%. So the Fed wants there to be 2% of inflation consistently. Now, you guys might realize as we're in our quarantine that the economy doesn't always do what it wants. Sometimes it's going to surprise you. So when it gives you a surprise, it's a Fed's job to respond to it. So you're going to see this up here. Now, here's a few tips to think about in this game. First, trying to guide the economy is like driving a fully loaded semi-truck down a steep mountain at night on an icy road. It's very hard. If you're going to make a change, you need to make careful changes and you need to make them early. If you try to jerk the wheel and expect the truck to turn immediately, you'll lose control. So think about 2 moves ahead, okay? So what that means is you need to think ahead, and anything you do right now won't take effect for the future. So let me show you what I mean. If you notice right now, unemployment rate in the game is a little bit, well, low. We want it at 5, but it's 4.68, so it's doing pretty well. Inflation is a little high. It's at 2.11. Well, I want it at 2, and it's really close. Now I see momentum, so think about that icy truck. If there's momentum, you need to kind of get ahead of it. And 4% is our federal funds rate. Think of it like the discount rate. It's the thing that you can control to control the economy. So now that I see inflation here is a little high and going up, I'm going to try to bring it back down. So I'm going to give it a couple clicks to bring it down. Now remember, is it going to go down right now? The answer is no. It takes some time to move. I also didn't change the interest rate very much. So as you guys see the interest rate going, did my plan have any effect? The answer is no, because I knew that it never works right after you click it. I expect it to work the next turn. So I'm actually going to trust it and go ahead and leave it right there. One thing to think about as it's moving is I'm putting a little bit of downward pressure. And if you notice, the interest rate, it's not going up as much. It's flattened out a little bit. Remember, I'm still really close to my target rate, so I'm not in any kind of panic right now. So I bet if I click it right now, it'll flatten out at, you see it right there at about 2.36, or might even start going down right now. So I'll leave it again at where it is. And you know, it's 3.7, 3.9, 4. I've got good control. I might even want to go ahead and give it another nudge down because I flattened it out. I'm moving at hundredths of a percent, and I'm sure it would go down now. But wait, oh no, a crisis. You're all going to get a crisis. This one says a new energy source has hit the market. That's something that we call a positive supply shock. Oof, they didn't give me an easy one right here. So I'm going to have to kind of deal with it. Now I know my unemployment's low and my inflation is low as well. So I don't want to keep my interest rate high up here at 5. In fact, the thing you want to focus on is the inflation rate. The unemployment rate will always come back. So just follow inflation. So I want to bring inflation up. So 4, remember that's neutral, and I see I've got a lot of momentum bringing the inflation rate down. So I want to bring it below 4. Remember, a low interest rate means more money is available, causing more inflation. And since inflation's too low, I want to bring it back up. So I see a big drastic shock there. So I'm going to make a pretty drastic move. I want to get ahead of it. Remember, icy truck, downhill, icy on a road. It's going to be hard to steer. So let me try to get ahead of it now. So I go ahead and hit that. And I know right now, this isn't going to fix it. I need to be patient and think ahead. So I see the very end right here. I see it starting to flatten out. Now it's still going down, but I believe in myself and I think it's going to come up. So I'm going to leave it and see what happens right here. Okay, now I see the inflation rate starting to go back up. And I've got a lot of upward pressure that I put on it the last 2 turns. Now I want it to keep going up, but I don't want it to go up too fast. So I'm going to put it in neutral, put a little bit of downward pressure on it so it doesn't come up too fast and cause a lot of inflation. Ooh, like that. So what I did just in that last turn didn't create that to happen. That was something ready to occur anyway. So I need to get ahead of it. So I'm going to take drastic action to make sure my inflation doesn't get out of control. So let's go ahead and I put it all the way up to 7. Like I said, supply shocks are a really tough one. Oof, that is not good. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go ahead and bump it up a bit more. I do not want this to get out of control. All right. Now that I see I've got it in control, I've got my inflation rate to come down a little bit, and I don't want it to come down too fast. So I'm going to move it to 7. 7 is still downward pressure. It's just less. I don't want to send the inflation rate crashing down. So going down, 3.3, okay. It's coming down pretty fast, and I want it to kind of land like an airliner. I don't want to go ahead and crash it right into the ground. I want to land it gently. So I'm going to take some of that pressure off and maybe go to 5.75. I'm still pushing it down, just gently. Okay, it's starting to come down, but I want to take it easy. I don't want it to come down too fast, but I still want it to come down some. It's got downward momentum, so I'm pushing it down slower and slower. All right, I'm at 2.47. Gonna take it easy there, give it just a little bit of downward pressure, try to make it land nice and steady. And if you guys notice, I'm at 2.27. I'm right about where I want to be. There's still some downward pressure. I've got 3 turns left. All right, so I've flattened out. I'm still a little bit high, so I'm gonna just give it a tiny little nudge downward. Okay, started going up a little bit there. I'll give it one more nudge downward. It really won't matter too much because it's my last turn. We said you can't do much in one turn. You can only plan ahead. But notice how everything's nice and flat. I've got my lines there, and I won. Notice here how it says, congratulations. My unemployment rate is right by 5%, and my inflation rate is really close to 2. Your job is to beat the game. You're going to submit this as a print screen. And if you didn't win, you just go right to the button, and you will be able to play again. I'll give you some more videos. We'll go over this in the Zoom lessons. I'll even give you guys a chance. Make sure you practice and pay attention to what I'm saying and the thinking behind it. If you keep doing the same thing and losing, you need to do something different. So pay attention to this. I'll give you several other scenarios to show you how it'll work. And I'm sure you guys will have no problem beating the game. All right. Well, good luck, everyone. And I hope you guys are understanding this stuff. And I'll see you in the Zoom meetings.